Happy Monday. Welcome back to Beyond the Briefing. I'm Sean Spicer. Thanks to everyone who's already subscribed and left us a rating and a review. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe. Super helpful. It helps put food on the table to hundreds and hundreds of starving children. No, it doesn't, but I would super appreciate you doing that. So thank you very much. Reminder, we come out Mondays, but Thursdays, we always have a really interesting episode with friends and people I've met, talking about their careers, breaking down headlines, and talking about their success kind of beyond the briefing, what you know about them, really bringing you insight into their success and their careers. Everything makes them who they are. So stay tuned. We've got another great interview on tap for this Thursday as well. And on Mondays, obviously, we try to bring you stories from the weekend and what's going to be driving the week in news, kind of get you prepared, right? You know, if you're having a dinner, you're going to a cocktail party, you want to sit around the water cooler, you're on a Zoom, I don't know what you're doing, but you want to sound smart politically. That way you tune in Mondays, you get the Beyond the Briefing so that you really sound like the really clued in person. And, you know, look, if you've got ideas or feedback, you can always send me an email, contact@seanspicer.com, or obviously I'm on Instagram. We post clips from there. You can always DM me as well. Love to hear who you think would be good or what we've missed or any feedback that you have on a story that we've had. So with that, I'm going to kick us off with 5 stories I'm paying attention to that I think are driving the week. We are here on Monday, August 1st. We are 99 days until the midterm elections. And I think the number one story right now for this week are going to be these primaries tomorrow. There are 5 states holding primaries. Let me kind of kick off the 2 that I think are going to drive the big news. Arizona and Missouri, I think, are going to lead the news come Wednesday morning. The Arizona, there's 2 big things going on there. You've got the governor's race. You've got Karen Taylor Robson versus Kari Lake. It's interesting because this really is an interesting dynamic. Karen Taylor Robson is backed by Vice President Mike Pence and the current term-limited Republican incumbent governor Doug Ducey. They are backing Karen, and it's a very, very tight race. They're going against former reporter Kari Lake. She is Trump-endorsed. She was at that rally a couple weeks ago when the president was out there in Arizona. And look, I got to tell you, my gut is that Trump endorsement, while the polling has this thing literally neck and neck in the 40s, I'm going to say that Kari Lake, with the Trump endorsement, pulls this thing out. So there you go on that. On the Senate race, it was a really tight race, 4-way race, not too many weeks ago between Blake Masters, who worked for Peter Thiel, Jim Lamont, Mark Bronovich, the current Attorney General, and Mike McGuire. Since Trump endorsed Blake Masters, he has really broken out. He's now in most recent polling at 40%. Jim Lamont is in second at 22%. But that Trump endorsement, I think, no question about it, put Blake Masters over the top. I'd be surprised if he doesn't win rather substantially tomorrow. But Arizona is going to be or should be a good night for Trump-endorsed candidates tomorrow night. And we'll see. And if it's not, that's going to be a problem for Trump. I think a lot of the quote-unquote establishment would really like to see Karen Taylor Robson pull out that nomination for governor. But in either case, I think either one of them should do just fine going into the general. The Senate's going to be interesting because they're going up against Mark Kelly, the Democratic incumbent senator there. He won a short term, so he's up for re-election already to fill an expired term that he had filled of John McCain, or that had been appointed by Martha McSally. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's going to be a tight race. Mark Kelly's got a ton of money. He's been waiting for this, and it's going to be a sprint to November. The polling suggests that the Republicans should do well. I think it's going to really come down to how they come out of this primary. So keep that in mind. On to Missouri. All eyes are on this Senate race. It ostensibly is a 4-person race. You've got Eric Schmidt, the current Attorney General. You've got former Governor Eric Greitens, who resigned after some scandals. You've got Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler and Congressman Billy Long. There are some who say it's a 3-person race. I think it's a 2-person race. I think it's between Eric Schmidt and Eric Greitens. It is Monday morning. President Trump has put something out on Truth Social saying that he's going to endorse in this race. I've got to believe, from everything that I'm hearing coming out of Bedminster, where the president is right now, that he is going to endorse Eric Greitens. Here's the bottom line, though. If you're watching the Missouri Senate race, what you need to know is this. Whomever Trump endorses, whether it's Schmidt or Greitens, and those are really the only two options in terms of who he could possibly endorse, that they will win. The polling suggests that enough people are waiting for Trump to see who he'll endorse. If Greitens gets that endorsement, he will win. If Schmidt gets it, he will win. But everything that I'm hearing out is that there has been a full court press the last 96 hours of people calling President Trump, talking to him, telling him to get behind Greitens. So we'll know. Hopefully, definitely by close of business today, he put out this truth on his social media platform saying that he was going to make an endorsement. He put out one last night about a Breitbart article suggesting that the polling was skewed towards Schmidt and that these were fake polls. He sort of claimed that this was a dishonest effort in politics. All signs are that he's going with Greitens. I could be wrong on this, but I'm just telling you where I think this thing is headed. What that means for the general, we'll see. But I think Trump is really drawn to this race because Greitens was the first candidate that I'm aware of that came out saying that he was going to vote against Mitch McConnell if he was elected. And I think that Trump is not only drawn to candidates that obviously like him and support his policies, etc., but also that are on board with him sort of seeking out some revenge factor, and in this case, really going after McConnell, who he thinks has been disloyal. I think Greitens ingratiated himself early on that tactic, so we'll see how that plays out, but only time will tell. In Kansas, it's going to be interesting. Two things there. You've got a primary for governor. President Trump gave Derek Schmidt, who's running, his complete endorsement in that race. I think that's going to be a pretty much done deal. Schmidt is the 3-term state attorney general. He faces no major opposition, so I think that's a done deal. Interesting race to keep an eye on there, though. Former Secretary of State Chris Kobach, who had run for governor last cycle and come up short, is running for attorney general. It'll just be interesting to see if he's able to make this comeback. Anyway, that's my take on that. In Washington State, the race that I think is important to watch there is the 3rd Congressional District. Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, she was one of the 10 that voted for impeachment, Republican incumbents. She has a primary challenge. It'll be interesting to see whether she withstands it. I think of all places, she's probably best positioned to. I haven't seen a ton of polling on that, but it's a little different of a dynamic there than it is in a lot of places. Moving over to Michigan, which is the 5th state, holding primaries tomorrow. Tudor Dixon is running for governor there. Trump endorsed her. She got a 16-point bump out of the gate. This, again, goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Missouri Senate race. That Trump endorsement plays huge with the base. And you saw Tudor Dixon jump up massively right after Trump endorsed her. I think for where she stands in the current polling, I mean, she's over 20 points ahead of the next Republican in the field for that Republican primary. I'm going to put Tudor Dixon as the one to watch tomorrow night. If she loses, that would be a huge upset considering where she stands in the polls and the momentum that she got out of that Trump endorsement. But all in all, I mean, if you look at, and then obviously the only other one that is interesting in Michigan from a Republican side is Peter Meijer, freshman congressman, voted for impeachment. He is running against this guy, John Gibbs, who was endorsed by President Trump. This is an interesting race only because Meijer obviously voted for impeachment, but the Democrats are actually doing what they've done in some of these governor races and backing Gibbs and trying to put some money behind his campaign to get the base excited for Gibbs. They think that they could actually beat Gibbs in a general election. They don't think they can do the same with Peter Meijer. So it's a very interesting dynamic. The Democrats have been doing this in a lot of these gubernatorial races where they'll back the more quote-unquote MAGA candidate because they think they can actually beat that person in a general election. They've done this in this Michigan third congressional race primary, thinking that if they back John Gibbs and get his name ID up, associate him more with Trump, which they think will help him win the primary, then they can beat him in the general. But keep an eye on that. On the Democratic side, for what it's worth, in Michigan 11, you've got 2 incumbents, Andy Levin and Haley Stevens, in a primary battle because of redistricting. This has happened a couple places across the country when they've redone the districts. They've ended up putting two current members of Congress in the same district. Some Republicans have had this happen to them. Some Democrats, you're seeing this in New York with a couple of the Democrats. Here in Michigan's 11th district, you've got Andy Levin and Haley Stevens. It's interesting because it's really put some of the Democrats' constituencies on opposite sides. Andy Levin's Jewish, and yet the big Jewish political organizations on the left are backing Haley Stevens. It's fascinating what's going on. Another just sort of race to keep an eye on. So those are the 5 big states that are having primaries tomorrow, and what to keep an eye on. Second thing I'm keeping an eye on is this whole changing of definitions, right? We started seeing this last week. The definition of a recession seemed to change. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton's former economic advisor, who's now currently the White House director of economic advisor, Deese, they've all said before that a recession is defined by 2 quarters of negative growth. Now the White House is doing backflips and saying that that's not the case anymore. A recession has much more into it, and they're going to leave it up to this board to decide. What people have to understand is the board that they're talking about will not go back and look at the data until a year from now. So what the White House is doing is simply trying to buy time. But more than that, they're trying to tell everyone that what they feel and see every day isn't a recession. And again, the only time it's not been a recession in the past, whatever it's been, several decades, when you've had 2 quarters of negative growth, is when it's been 1 quarter of negative growth. So they're really trying to redefine something that everybody has used as a common definition economically for decades now. And it's a fascinating thing. Communications-wise, I'm fascinated by the fact that the White House, instead of trying to tell people what they're doing to address the inflation, to make your life better, right? So harken back to the 92 election. It's like, I feel your pain. It's the economy, stupid. Really they're trying to basically say you're not feeling this. It's not a recession. It's like you're trying to tell somebody it's not what they see and they feel every day when they go to the gas station, the supermarket, the Target, whatever it is. And it's a backward strategy that is not going to help them in November. Not that I'm looking to give them any help. The other thing that's interesting is this reconciliation bill. It's there from a political standpoint. I get it. They're going to say that this is a big win. They've changed what was called Build Back Better, and they just changed the name on it, right, to the Inflation Reduction Act, which you want to talk about redefining things. I mean, this is almost as silly as what they're saying with recession. They went from a bill that was literally all about spending money, Build Back Better, which some people claimed is responsible for the inflation. I mean, Build Back Better is what Larry Summers and some of these other Democratic economists are talking about when they're saying this spending has led to greater inflation. So they just literally changed the name on the bill to call it the Inflation Reduction Act, which is absolutely silly. It's what got us there in the first place. And if you think about what's in it, even one of the liberal commentators on the Sunday shows asked about it this weekend. He said, what in the bill actually reduces inflation? They couldn't do it. It creates more IRS agents. It spends a ton of money on green energy. And here's the kicker. It raises taxes. Now, this, if you recall, not too long ago, was a pledge of Joe Biden's. He said he wasn't going to raise taxes on people making under $400,000 ever. This bill does it. Not my words. The congressional scorekeeper that does this, that looks at bills and figures out their stuff, has said it will raise taxes. So it doesn't help people is the bottom line. It's going to spend more money. You know, it's a payoff to a lot of folks. It's a big payoff. If anything, it's a jobs bill for the IRS. And if you think about going into November, right, you've got a scenario where Republicans just got handed a gift where they can now campaign and say, you guys raise taxes, you increase the size of the IRS, inflation's at an all-time high. I mean, it's from a political standpoint, this was not the time to strike this deal literally 99 days away from a midterm election. And the interesting thing is, with the other bills that they done, that one infrastructure bill, all the Democrats went out and campaigned on it. They talked about what a great deal is. I will be interested to see if any Democrat that's in a tough race mentions this. I don't think they will, because It doesn't, I mean, do you really want to be defending the fact that you just hired more IRS agents, that you expanded the powers and the reach of the IRS? I mean, who thought this was a good idea? This was one of the reasons that it got killed in the first place, and then they brought it back in and tacked this on. I mean, the bottom line is this was a bad political idea, and we'll see where it goes. But the X factor, by the way, is Kristen Sinema of Arizona. We mentioned the primaries there, but, she has not said whether or not she's on board. She's been very coy about this. The thing that's interesting is one of the provisions that's still in the bill, this thing called carried interest, which is way too much to get into right now, is something that she said from the get-go, I will not support a bill that has that in it. Well, that's in it. So, it'll be interesting to see how whether she caves, or whether or not she negotiates and tries to get that taken out, which I think would be hard to do because Manchin personally negotiated all this stuff to get it in, or whether or not she becomes, the person that breaks up the party. I don't think that that's where she wants to be. Politically, I just don't think that she's ready to take that on. She's already been threatened with a primary. I think she doesn't want to be seen as standing in the middle of this. But I also think that she's not going to sit by. So this could face a couple bumps in the road before it actually gets to a vote. Third thing I'm keeping an eye on is Nancy Pelosi's farewell tour. Make no mistake about this. She is off visiting a bunch of Asian nations and Southeast Asia, and I mean, seriously, she is literally, we all get the joke, right? November comes, under any scenario right now, as long as everyone's still breathing, they lose the majority in Congress. She's out of speaker. She will step down from Congress, right? She had to say she was running for re-election so that it looked good, but there's already a shadow primary for her seat, including her daughter, Christine. She's gone. This is a farewell tour, right? It is the most selfish and reckless thing that she has done by putting Taiwan out there. That being said, she put the United States in a situation that we cannot back down from. China started this thing off with their call, President Biden, President Xi, saying if she goes, the exact quote was translated as if you play with fire, you will get burned. Think about that. This is the Chinese president threatening the third in line from the presidency with going to Taiwan. Unbelievable. But we're now in this situation where we're moving military assets in the 7th Fleet's area of responsibility down in the South China Sea off the Taiwan Strait to sort of get ready for this. There was a news report this morning that said that they had sources in Taipei that she was in fact going. She has not listed Taiwan as one of her official stops, but she's also not said that she's not going. She's been very coy about this, and it's leaked out. But if she doesn't go, it'll look like she backed down to China. If she does go, she puts us in this huge situation, and China has made it very clear that they will retaliate. During a call today, China warned against, quote, egregious political impact of Pelosi's planned visit to Taiwan. They obviously claim Taiwan is part of them. They think it's part of their territory, and so it's it is a Chinese asset. It is a Chinese territory, and that we have no right just to go there. We obviously disagree with that. We've made it clear, but we've always had this little stalemate with them. We haven't had a speaker go there since Gingrich went there in the late 90s. This is what the foreign ministry said, quote, "We would like to tell the U.S. once again that China is standing by, and the Chinese People Liberation Army will never sit idly by. China will take resolute responses and strong countermeasures to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity." Wow. I mean, those are fighting words. And then the spokesman went off and said, as for what measure, if she dares to go, then let's wait and see. So we're escalating this thing pretty quickly. They're putting themselves in a corner where they have to do something because they've made it clear to the world that this is not something they find acceptable, that they're threatening her. And so I don't see how you can say, don't go. And if you do go, you'll get burned and blah, 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 and we'll wait and see, and then not do anything. And then if they do something, then what do we have to do? Because we can't then sit by and let them retaliate against us for us going to a country that we have and we believe we have every right to do. So this thing just worries me so much because we are in a situation where things can escalate real quick, all because Nancy Pelosi wanted to go on this farewell tour because she's leaving Congress. She's getting kicked out of Congress. But the irony is that most Republicans have basically said, because she's put us in the situation that, she has to go now, and the U.S. should never back down to China. But it is only because of her reckless behavior that are in this position. She did not clear this by the White House. The administration came out very clearly and urged her not to go. That's the selfish part of this. She did it because it was all about her. She wants to go. It's about her legacy. It's about her farewell tour. Think about the amount of military assets, air and sea assets that we are now having to scuttle around that area just to ensure that we're ready in case her behavior, her actions result in something that we have to protect us for. It's unbelievable. And I don't see a way in which we can not go, and which she backs away from this, because the optics of that look almost worse. So by the time I come back to talk to you next week, we'll clearly know the outcome of this. But keep an eye on that thing, because, again, I think this is something that is at a slow boil all week. And as soon as it's official that she's going, it's going to go from like a 1 or a 2 to a 10 and stay there until she gets off. And then when she leaves, those next 24, 48, 72 hours, that's what I'm really concerned about. What do they do in return, and who do they do it, or what did they do it to? So keep an eye on that. I mean, that again, something to be aware of and to keep an eye on. I want to jump into the Sunday shows, topic 4. I always love taking an analysis on this. In Spicer and Company on Mondays, we always do this. I look at it more from a critical media standpoint on the show. Today, what I want to look at is some of the what came out of this. I think the big story yesterday was what Joe Manchin said and did. But before we get into that, there was this little inside baseball, inside Washington thing. He had done this thing. If you ever read Political Playbook, there's this thing called a full Ginsburg. And for most people, they're like, what the heck is that? It's this term that was named for William H. Ginsburg. He was the lawyer for Monica Lewinsky during that scandal involving Clinton, and he accomplished this in February of 1998. And what it meant was he went on all 5 of the morning shows. This Week on ABC, Fox News Sunday, Face the Nation on CBS, Meet the Press on NBC, and then he went on what was then called Late Edition on CNN. It's now called State of the Union. But the difference between what Ginsburg did in 1998 and what Manchin did is Ginsburg, and what is called the full Ginsburg, went to every show in person. So he literally, he drove, or I'm sure he had a driver, but he went from everyone else. Manchin, who is recovering from COVID, did it remotely. And several people have done this before. There is sort of this is very like inside Washington, but it's called a modified Ginsburg if you do that. I just thought I'd share that with you so that if you're at that water cooler and someone says, oh, I heard Manchin did the full Ginsburg, you can say, actually, he did the modified Ginsburg. So little one-upsman if you're having that conversation this week, that you'll at least know the deal. Anyway, getting back to Manchin, he was obviously on to defend himself about this reconciliation bill, because as we talked about, you think about, why did you suddenly cut this deal that seemingly has nothing good in it, and it has a lot of things that you said you were opposed to in the past, and what prevented you from striking a deal? All this really comes down to, bottom line, is he got a deal on a vote on a separate, some issues that are pertaining to West Virginia. No kidding. And that's really what a lot of this comes down to. But where I was really intrigued were, one, he gets asked by, I think it was both Jake Tapper on State of the Union and Chuck Todd, do you basically care who controls Congress? And he says, no, I get along with everybody. I can play with everyone. We should be focused on doing the work of the people and less about politics. Like, okay, well, wait a second. Full stop. You are the chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. That is hugely powerful and important to West Virginia. So if you care about representing the people of West Virginia, then you must think you would care about Democrats controlling at least the Senate. Maybe not the House, but I would, because the more you can get and deliver back for West Virginia, it's becoming a more and more red state. You're a Democrat. The one talking point you have is that you deliver for the state. You bring things home. You get things done. Energy and natural resources are massively important to West Virginia. So the idea that you get asked a question about whether or not you care who controls Congress and you go, man, kind of, sort of, just is insane to me. Like, your entire power base, you personally, and what you can deliver from West Virginia, should be an easy layup question. But it doesn't go on. I mean, it goes on, right? You think, okay, that should be big enough. But then he gets asked if he's going to support Biden. And he says, like, I don't want to talk about elections. Again, I get it. Biden's in the tank in West Virginia. He's like 19% or something. But, like, you've already owned this. You're a Democrat. You've said you're voting. I mean, like, that. I felt like that's such a layup question. And it goes on, though. He gets asked about, there's this new party that Andrew Yang, you remember him, the Yang Gang, he ran for president as a Democrat. Christy Todd Whitman, former governor of New Jersey as a Republican, served as the head of the EPA in the Bush administration, and a couple others are forming. It's this new centrist party. The idea is you don't have to give up your old party, but you can join this one, and they're basically going to take every issue that's like a 70-80% issue, and that's like what they believe in, right? So it's on, I don't know, social issues, on fiscal issues, they're going to be like the party that whatever polls well is where they're at. Anyway, he gets asked, are you thinking about joining this party? And he won't answer the question. Again, you were the Democratic governor of West Virginia. You've been a multi-term senator from West Virginia. This isn't a tough question. No, I'm a Democrat. I'm staying a Democrat. Or I have no interest in joining some random third party with a bunch of people who aren't in power and have I mean, it's a layup question. I don't know. Maybe it's because he's still recovering from COVID and he did 5 shows and he was just... But, like, those questions are the layup ones. The hard ones were the ones on reconciliation and asking... Well, I mean, they weren't that hard, actually. But those would be the ones that you would think are the tough ones. You know, and here he is getting asked 3 layup questions where the answer is no. You know, like, no, I'm not going to join the party. Yes, I would support Biden. And yes, I want Democrats to control. It's 3 simple questions. And that becomes the news. The funny thing is, the reason that I think he did the 5 shows is to basically signal back to West Virginia, hey, here's the deal I'm cutting. Here's why it's important. Here's how it's going to benefit West Virginia. As I said, Democratic senators sitting in a growingly deeper and deeper red state, you would think, hey, I want to make sure I'm telling you why this is good for West Virginia, why these tax increases aren't as bad as you might hear, because they are. And yet, nothing. Anyway, I want to move on. Jon Stewart was also out on all the shows slamming Republicans for this PACT Act to expand benefits for veterans impacted by burn pits. So 2 quick things on the background of this. Obviously, we all know Jon Stewart from The Daily Show. He was very involved in getting a bill passed for 9/11 families who had health-related issues after 9/11, especially those around the World Trade Center. They'd breathe a lot of stuff that's causing them ailments and cancer and things. Stewart played a central role in getting that bill through Congress to ensure that they had the health care and the funding that they needed to do this. And from my understanding is this issue of burn pits was brought to him afterwards. Now, these burn pits are basically huge fire pits, burn pits, outside of bases in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, where literally everything was burned. You name it, it was burned. Like trash, feces, whatever it was. Like there was no like, garbage place. So they just literally lit stuff on fire, kept it going, and then would throw stuff on. And the smoke and the fumes would float, obviously, all around. And a lot of veterans who floated in and out of theater in both Afghanistan and Iraq in particular. And from what I understand, this goes all the way back to Vietnam, but obviously it's drawn a lot more attention now because of Afghanistan and Iraq, is these veterans were coming back and the VA was over and over again denying the claims, saying, hey, we can't record this, we have no proof. And it's like, you think about it, you're a National Guardsman or reservist, you come in out of theater, a couple months later you have trouble breathing. It's what are you going to do? Hey, can you guys send me some photos of, where those burn pits were, where I was, where my I was staying? It's just not. So anyway, there's enough evidence now that at least they should be evaluated and treated. And Stewart, picked up the mantle of that cause and ran with it. And so the story goes something like this, that the bill passes the House, the Senate. It actually passed the House. I mean, the Senate, I think, like 84-19. I couldn't, because that's more than 100. Anyway, but it was something. Wow, look at how quick I did the math there. But I think it was 84 senators or 81 senators. Maybe that was 81-19. There you go. That gets you to 100. Anyway, and then it goes back over the House. This fight comes down to discretionary versus mandatory spending. Discretionary spending is that portion of the budget where Congress has to approve every year. The mandatory spending, like Medicaid and other veterans benefits, are literally just they're called mandatory spending. It is 100% on autopilot. Congress has no discretion. Every year it gets its cost of living adjustment, its COLA, and it goes and it's on autopilot. The Democrats wanted to change it from discretion to mandatory so that they never had to come back and fight for that money, if you will, every year after year. And so they changed it. Some of the Republicans balked. There's some questions about it. Stewart claims that Ted Cruz is lying about why he voted against it. Pat Toomey was the leader of opposition when that came up. And because it needed of the procedural hoops that it went through, Toomey from Pennsylvania, who's retiring, stopped it and said that he thought that the way that the Democrats did it, by changing this, and then they put in some extraneous spending, he was upset with that. Well, Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, says he's going to bring it back up on Tuesday. I'm going to tell you this right now. I think it's going to pass. And I think Republicans, the problem is that Republicans picked a fight too late. If they had problems, they had changes, they had already voted yes. And it's a veterans bill to help people with burn pits that have dealt with burn pits that are having cancer and are dying. This was not the fight to have at this time. If you were going to make technical, it sailed through the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Those are the times to have those fights, to talk about funding, to talk about technical issues. But you can't vote on it. It had to go back over the House and come back, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is this just didn't look good for the Republicans. And I think that come Tuesday, when it comes back up for a vote, it will pass. And so it's sort of like, at the end of the day, what did you get for all of this if you're a bunch of these Republicans? You just got a bunch of bad press for nothing. So anyway, my guess is that something that we keep an eye on. The third thing that came out of the Sunday shows was that Biden had retested positive for COVID again. Now, here's why this is interesting. This is a White House created problem. Let me explain. When Biden gets his diagnosis with COVID and they put it out, one of the things the White House said right out of the bat was, hey, he is going to stay isolated until he tests negative. Well, if you've ever had COVID or know anyone who has, you know that you can test positive for weeks. Sometimes I've heard, even months, if it stays in you, but that doesn't mean that you're still contagious. In fact, the CDC says if you are vaccinated, or I don't even know if it's just vaccinated, but I think it's vaccinated, then after 5 days of not having symptoms, you're fine. You can go out. I think they tell you to wear a mask or something. But point is, the CDC tells you that you just need to wait 5 days from being asymptomatic. They didn't do that. So we had this doctor on Spicer & Company, and I asked the doctor, I said, well, I don't get it. Why'd they do this? This doesn't make any sense. He said, well, he's on the drug Paxlovid. And what happens when you're on Paxlovid is that at the end of 5 days, you'll most likely test negative. I get it. Okay. But the doctor said, and here is the aha moment. A certain percentage of people have a rebound effect and then test positive again. Fauci, in fact, himself had this problem. So the White House knew this was a possibility. I think they just thought they were being cute, thought that they'd get the negative test because he was on Paxlovid, and oh, great, look, he's negative. But nobody told them to say that. This was so stupid. Literally, it's a self-created, because who knows, let's say that Biden tests positive for the next 4 weeks or something. It's not that he's contagious. He has no symptoms, he says right now. So you're going to leave the guy in isolation for a week, 2 weeks, who knows? Just because they screwed this up from the beginning. Now, if they change the messaging, they're going to look dumb. But this was their own CDC that doesn't tell them to do it, and they did it anyway. Just literally another self-created mess that they have made for themselves. Anyway, keep an eye on that one because I will find it interesting how they get themselves out of this. All right, the last story I've got for you this week is sort of an interesting one. It's climate change, and it's the hypocrisy that has been coming from the left. It's funny because I love this discussion in the sense that all of these people who are the loudest about climate change tend to be the biggest hypocrites on climate change. And none other than Taylor Swift herself stepped in it this week. There's this report that comes out, I don't know the group at all, and it had tracked Taylor Swift's plane. And it says that she took to the skies 170 times in the first 200 days of 2022. Now check this out. According to them, it emitted 8,293.54 metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is 22,923 minutes, almost 16 days of airtime. And the CO2 released into the atmosphere during these past 7 months is equivalent to what 1,184 average people would emit in a year. So here you have Taylor Swift, who's been, I think she has it in a song, and she's all been trying to be Miss Liberal Wokester for the last couple of years in terms of who she's endorsing, all this, joining this crowd of people who love to tell you what to do and then do the opposite. The funny thing about this was, I loved it. Her people come out, right, and say, just so you know, it wasn't all her. She lends her plane out to people all the time. And I'm like, first of all, I'd love to be one of Taylor's friends. I mean, would you like being like, hey, would you like to use my plane for the weekend? Sure. I mean, that's a good friend. But secondly, that doesn't make it any less worse for the environment because you gave your plane. And I'm just saying that from your response standpoint, if you're going to go out and preach to people about their behavior and then get on a private plane and pop around all the time, and your only pushback is, well, I let my friends use my plane sometimes, so it wasn't entirely me. I'm not really sure that that's the best pushback. I mean, and it goes back. I mean, you've got John Kerry, Mr. Climate Czar himself. He flies around on private planes. Kamala Harris is literally flying to Miami for a meeting on climate change. Biden recently flew up to Providence, Rhode Island on Air Force One, then got into like a 25-minute motorcade. Think about all those cars, and went to the Cape, where he did an event at a closed plant to talk about climate change. So he literally flew a plane to get into a motorcade, to drive 25 minutes, to stand in front of a closed plant to talk about climate change. I mean, think about how much CO2 that emitted. It's funny, though. All these people who want to preach about climate change, it all comes down to optics, right? They want to write a song. They want to stand in front of a plant. They want to go to a speech. And they want to tell us about our behavior. Don't do this. Change your life in this way. Start acting like this. Pay more attention to that. But they don't change their own life. That's the thing that's so beautiful about this. They're like, here's what you should do. But I'm going to get on my plane and preach to you about what you should do. Anyway, I get a kick out of these things all the time because it's staring us in the face. The amount of hypocrisy from folks like this is unbelievable. But it never ceases to amaze, and it always gives good material. Anyway, those are the 5 things that I'm keeping an eye on right now. Look forward to being you back this Thursday. We have another great guest. In fact, we've actually got several lined up. I'm excited as we've started this project. It's like we've started to talk to people in there. Everybody's saying yes, and I've started to have some initial conversations, and the stories and the conversations are so phenomenal. I'm excited to share them with you. Please do me a favor, as I said before, subscribe, share, write a review, and when I say share, like send it to your friends, get them to download it. If you're driving, if you're going to the beach, if that Zoom call fails, this is a perfect time. And again, it's so great to get this kind of insight and information. You can just wow people on that next Zoom call, hanging out at the water cooler if you're back in person. Anyway, thanks for listening, tuning in to Beyond the Briefing. I look forward to seeing you back on Thursday.